Welcome to this video. I think it's number 15 in my set on the subject of presentation. So you can see there's quite a bit involved in presenting our images, both from a corrective point of view and also a creative point of view. The breakout technique is where we allow part of our image to appear outside the main picture space. Quite often we allow it to spill onto the border. The first time that I used this technique was back in my darkroom days with black and white prints, where I had a blackbird spy plane flying out of the frame, breaking the frame as it went and leaving a vapor trail across the image. It was a little harder to do back then, so the image caused quite a stir, but now it's a lot easier with Photoshop layers. Let's take a look at the technique. I've chosen to have Bertie Bassett here, the hot air balloon in the center, with his head sticking out of the frame. First thing we need to do is to remove the lock from the layer thumbnail on the right hand side. Then I'm going to use a selection to select the section of the head that I want outside the frame. I think we can do that with the rectangular marquee tool, so I'll select that from the top left of the toolbox. And I'll click and drag at the top and decide how much I want hanging out onto the border. I think I'll just come down just below Bertie Bassett's eye, just a little bit more than that, something like that. All I need to do now is to cut out what's within that selection and paste it back, and Photoshop will do that on a new layer. I'm going to use shortcuts, but you'll find these commands in your edit menu. Control X will cut that section away. Control V will paste it back, albeit in the wrong place. No problem with that. If I just press the Control key, you'll notice that my tool changes to the Move tool, and I can click and drag and drop that into position where it came from. What we're going to do now is remove the sky around Bertie Bassett's head. So if for a moment I turn off the base image here, what we've got to do is remove all of that sky. Well, that's going to be pretty easy, I think. Let's pick up our magic wand from the toolbox, click into the sky, and I'll just zoom in and have a look just to make sure I'm happy with that selection, and I think that is honestly going to meet all our needs. I'm going to hit Control 0 to fit it back on screen. I think I'll put just a little bit of a feather in that selection using Select Mask, which you'll see just above the head. So let's go to that, and I'm going to go straight to the feather command and just put, I think probably 1 pixel is going to be enough, and down here in the output section I want to output this back to a selection. Click OK. There we have it. So now it's a simple matter of hitting that Control X again, and there we have the head free from the sky. Now we can turn the other layer on, and we're going to need some extra canvas because we've got canvas that's going to form behind the head here, so we need some on the left, right and the base. As always, we're never quite sure just what we need, so perhaps if we go to the image and canvas size window, we can switch to whatever measurement you like to work from. I tend to go to inches. Remember, when you put a value, if you're using the relative box, if you put a value, let's say of, if I put 6 in there, then Photoshop's going to put 3 inches either side. We're not sure if it's going to be enough, but we can always add some. If it's not, we can crop it away if it's too much. So let's add 6 and 6, click OK, hit Control 0 to fit the image on screen, and straight away we can see we've probably got all the canvas we need here. So I think before I go any further, what I may do is crop back straight away. So I'm going to move over to my toolbox and select the crop. Whenever I select the crop, I always take a quick look up at the top of the screen just to make sure there's no values there, and as you can see there is one. So I'm going to reselect this and choose just the width and height resolution, because I'm going to drop the top down. I want it to be just a little bit more than the hat, and then just for speed I'm going to count these squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. How many have we got on the edge here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Half there, a little bit there. We've more or less got that right. So all we really want is 9 down here. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Actually, that looks about right to me. So I'm going to hit the Enter key to commit that change. Now, can you see a fine line between Bertie Bassett's head that's in the frame and the main image? Ignore that. When we flatten this image together to finish later on, that will disappear. It's just the way the screen is resolving fine detail. What I need to do next is to add a new blank canvas. So I'm going to do that from the bottom right of the layers, and then I'm going to drag it to the bottom of the layered stack. Now we've got that choice we've had a number of times throughout these videos of choosing a colour for the background. I might even just choose the colour of that pale blue sky. So going over to the left hand side to the toolbox, I'm going to pick up my eyedropper tool. I'm using it from the options with a 5x5 average, so I'm going to click into the blue. You see that appear as the foreground colour in the colour picker at the bottom of the toolbox. Then I can flood that with Alt backspace. There's my background. What we need just to finish this off is a fine line around the edge of the main image. But if we're going to put a fine line around that edge, it's got to be on the outside, isn't it? If it's on the inside, we're going to see it across Bertie Bassett's face. If it's on the outside, then it's going to be hidden behind his face, so we'll see it everywhere around the edge of the image apart from the face. Probably the best way to do that is if I hold my control key and click that layer. You can see Photoshop makes a selection of it pretty easy. But then if we select the layer and add another new blank layer above that, and this one is just going to be for the line we're going to produce. When we've got everything on separate layers, we've always got lots of control, but this is fairly simple stuff. Let's go to Edit Stroke and add a few pixels of, probably I'll choose black, I think. So way over to the left hand side and into the Edit menu, choose Stroke. First thing I'll do is to make sure it's on the outside where I need it. I'm going to click the little color panel and I will go down and choose black. 1 pixel or 2 pixels. Generally I found that when we're putting black lines on images, we can tend to accept a thicker line than we can with white, but of course it all depends on the color you're putting that line over the top of. We can always hit Ctrl Z if we don't get this right, but I'll guess at 2 and click OK. Hit Ctrl D. Looks a little bit on the weak side, doesn't it? So if I do hit Ctrl Z, I can go back, Edit, Stroke. Maybe I should have gone a little bit heavier. Ctrl D. That looks a lot better, I think. And you can see what I mean now. Although it does appear you can still see that, what I'm going to do in a moment is flatten all of these layers together. Remember to save them as a Photoshop file first though, but when we flatten these together you'll see that line disappear. So what I'll do here is hit Ctrl 0 so we get the image a little larger. I'll go to the top right of my layered stack here and I'll come down here and say flatten. Did you see the line just disappear? It's a weird thing and you just need a little confidence that that is actually going to happen. There's our breakout. Of course we can put textures and whatever we want into the border, but here it looks quite nice just as it is. Now that sort of image was very quick and easy to put together. Let's have a look at something that's going to give us a little bit more of a challenge. Now how about this image where we crop it to a square and we allow the headlights either side to pop out onto the border. I've already removed the lock to the right of the layer thumbnail and I've selected my rectangular marquee tool from the toolbox. If we hold the Shift key when we click and drag this tool, we'll get a perfect square. So if I start just outside the top and I hold the Shift and I click and drag and I make sure I go past the bottom, I'm going to get a perfect square there. Now we do have the choice to offset this a little bit, but I'm going to choose to drop it in the center, and as you can see it's snapping into place. So what I'm going to do with that center portion is just copy it to a new layer. Control J will do that. There you can see it on the right hand side. Now looking over to the layers and the new layer we've just created, we can see that either side here it's completely transparent. If I turn the background off you can see it, but we can see it in the layers. So if I go back to my toolbox and I pick up my magic wand and I click into the left or the right, it's only going to pick up that shape. What I'm going to do next is to select the bottom layer and hit Control J once again. Now I'm going to go back to the top layer and select the right hand side, back to the bottom layer and Control J once again. This layer here is now not needed. It's not vital we do this, but just so we can follow what's going on, let me just drop that in the bin, because obviously I've got it saved on my computer. We've got a similar issue that I showed with Bertie Bassett. We've got that little line on the left hand side. When we flatten this together it will disappear, and I can test it by going down and flatten. See it go? And I'll hit Control Z, so we can ignore that line for the time being. I'm going to drag this layer down to the bottom. That was a little error there. And what we're going to do is to take one at a time here, and we're going to now, let me turn off this one and that one. We're going to cut out just that section there, but of course it's rather fussy. So what I'm going to use here is a layer mask, and I'm going to do it manually. Now that sounds a little troublesome, but in actual fact it's not such a great problem. Let's hit the Control and Spacebar key. The zoom tool appears in plus mode. I'll click and drag to get this quite big on screen, and maybe even click a couple of other times to get it nice and large. How large you want to go is partly a personal choice. What I want from the layers though, with that top layer with the piece on the left, is to apply a layer mask. Back over to the toolbox, I need to select black as my foreground color. I want a basic soft edge brush, and looking up at the flow and the opacity I want them both set to 100%, because what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just mask around this section of the headlight, and the way I'm going to do that is using a method which I call shift click. So you can see I've made a small brush at the top right, so I'm going to click here. Don't worry that it's the headlight that's disappearing. We'll come back and reverse that in a moment. I'm going to move a short distance and click, 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 click. You can see I'm working what I call quick and dirty, because I want to speed up the process, because I'm conscious you're watching a video. But you can see the process. I'm running out of picture now, so I can just use my thumb on the spacebar. The hand tool appears. I can click and move, and I can continue all the way down. Now there is one other option in Photoshop that can be quite useful. If we go to the toolbox, we're used to using the hand, but there's another tool grouped with the hand. It's the Rotate View tool. Because sometimes when we're doing this sort of work, it's nice to select the tool and turn our artwork around. We often find it's a lot more convenient to work in certain ways, so it's comfortable for our hand. We do this when we're writing on a piece of paper on a table, or painting or drawing, so why shouldn't we do it in the digital world? I need to go back to my brush, but I'll finish off here very quickly. Click, click, click. You'll take a bit more care. Shorter steps on tighter curves, longer steps on shallow curves. We've got a bit of a fudge to do here, so I'll just continue as though the curve was there. So all I've got to do really is just mask all inside here, and we're virtually done. Now we can do that pretty easily. We can make selections, but to be honest it's not a big deal, is it? So I'm just going to take just a minute or two just to flood in the inside edge, and of course once we get away from the edge we can make the brush much bigger and do most of it pretty quickly. If you do choose to use that rotate view tool to get back to where I am now, just double click the tool from the toolbox and your artwork will jump back into position. Now you may wonder why I've taken out the lamp, because the lamp is the part that I want, but it was easier to do that because with the layer mask selected from the layers I can invert that. You'll find this command in your image menu, but Control I, and now you can see the logic of what I was doing. And when I turn the bottom image on, we're starting to see the end result, or what it's likely to look like. So I've got to go ahead and do the same thing with the lamp on the right. Now as you can see here, I've masked the headlight on the right hand side in exactly the same way as we did before. I've added some extra canvas and cropped it back exactly as we did with Bertie Bassett, and the only thing we've really got left to do here is to decide on the colour of the border and the fine line. Given the nature of the image, I think this may be one of those times when a black border may work rather well. So let's go down to the bottom of the layer, select to create a new blank layer, drag it to the bottom of the stack. Black is the foreground in my colour picker, so Alt backspace will flood that colour. Then if I hold the Control key and select the main image, I can prepare for that thin line, and we'll place that on a new blank layer as we did before. Once again, it needs to be above the main image and it needs to be on the inside of the line when we apply the stroke. I'll hit Control H to hide that. Edit, stroke. Now I'm going to drop back here to about 3 pixels and I'm going to I will go to white this time. I won't use a mid-grey. OK, OK, and I think we've probably got a pretty good result there. Always a good idea to save your work as a Photoshop file so you can come back to exactly where we are here in the cold light of tomorrow to make sure you're still happy with what you did. I'd like to try something different with the background. I think black works quite well given the subject matter, but let me select that bottom layer. I'll go to my toolbox and pick up a mid-grey. Never certain which shade of grey is going to work, but I prefer to apply it, then adjust it using maybe the levels, because that way I can see the border in conjunction with the image. So let me just hit Alt backspace. That's a little bit weak for me, but I did want to put some noise into that. So filter, noise, add noise, a little bit of Gaussian monochrome noise. I've got quite a heavy amount there, but I think it's going to work quite well. You may choose something a little less. But with that layer selected, if I bring up my levels, they're in the image menu, but Control L, you can see what I mean here. I can just drop that down until I get the density I think is working best with the image. And we're all going to choose something different. And maybe there's another alternative as well, where we combine a little bit of strategic colour with our breakout technique. But we have to be a bit careful, don't we? Because we can, if we're not careful, let our enthusiasm run away with us. Now I've got these layers saved, so I'm confident to go to the top right and choose Flatten. I'll hit the F key once and then again and Control 0, and there we can evaluate the image.